I'm just outside Strong Room Studios and we're about to go inside and meet Dave Pemberton. He's a great producer slash mixing engineer. He's worked with all sorts of guys, Prodigy, BT, Motorhead, Orbital, you name it. He's currently mixing the new Kasabian album slash DVD in 5.1. So we're going to go inside and take a look and see what he's up to. Luckily for us, Dave has very kindly allowed us in the door and agreed to answer a few questions for us. Thanks for that, Dave.
No worries.
I want to talk a little bit about what you've done. I want to start off with the beginning. So do you want to let us know what was the first thing that set you off that made you think, I want to be involved with audio professionally as opposed to just listening to it?
God. I've been in bands since I was about 14 and used to do live sound and things like that, and then got into studios later. Went to college for a couple of years, like end of the 80s. I learnt sound engineering, and that was it. Studio from then onwards.
Cool. And I believe, did you actually start your career here in Strong Room?
I worked at another studio first for 2 or 3 months, Jacob's studio in Surrey, which was a residential big SSL Neve studio. Assisted there for 2 or 3 months and then got a job up here and moved to London in 1990, I think.
Okay. And when you started out, were you doing, what sort of work were you doing? Was it like working tapes or making tea?
It was all making tea, lining up the tape machine, cleaning the heads, plugging in all the outboard. In those days it was all MIDI gear and 2-inch tape and MIDI equipment with an Atari computer, doing early dance music. Nice. So the Strong Room was the home of dance music in 1990. It was all kicking off. The original acid house parties used to be downstairs in this part here, when it was just a derelict warehouse.
Really?
And this is where dance music started, really. So I've been doing it ever since.
You've worked with some really big artists, some impressive ones, Prodigy, Motorhead, Orbital, all these guys. Can you remember at what point did you feel, was it one particular job where you felt you'd made it as a professional sort of?
Nah, you never made it.
Or?
Still haven't made it. You're still striving for that all the time. You never sit down and feel like you made it, or else that's the time you retire, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Just the constant work.
You're just lucky to keep working and never have to get a proper job.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, really.
Yeah. Definitely. So you've come from an analog background. Would you still consider yourself more of an analog type guy, or like you use a lot of
Not really these days. It's
digital man.
I use analog sometimes when you can, when there's a budget for it, but most of the time you can get just as good a result as digital. Especially with dance music. I grew up with digital. I was been using computers since the ZX81. Like I had an Atari as soon as it came out. We were using Cubase and Notator. So I've always been into computers and into digital. And these days, the sound quality is not an issue. You can get that analog sound using all digital equipment, no problem. So it's nice to use the old stuff sometimes. It's nice to use the old valve things. A bit of both, really.
Yeah, it's definitely come a long way, the digital gear. And so what gear do you like using digitally anyway? What programs?
Pro Tools most is my main program for mixing. Logic, Ableton and Reason for writing and for creating. Then usually I bounce down and end up with it in Pro Tools because the plugins, the compressors, the EQs are all much better, I think. Using mostly Sony Oxford EQs and Sony Oxford compressors with the Wave stuff and a few bomb factories here and there. But mostly Sony Oxfords, right? They're amazing.
Excellent. Okay. And do you mix differently depending on the final format? So if you're mixing something that's only going to be on an MP3, is there any difference to how you mix that as opposed to?
No, you mix it the same.
Vinyl or anything? It's all the same.
You get it sounding as good as you can, whatever format it's going on in the end.
A good mix is a good mix,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now I understand you've done a fair bit of work in 5.1.
Yeah, over the years done quite a bit.
So why did you choose to sort of start specialising or learning?
I've always been
learning
into that
5.1?
kind of thing since quadraphonic. I remember in the 70s when Pink Floyd released Dark Side of the Moon in quadraphonic, and it always fascinated me. Wow, I wish I could hear that. I never had a quadraphonic system then. And then 5.1 came out, and suddenly that was it. Probably it didn't really take off. In the early days, I used to do a lot of Super Audio CD, 5.1 mixing at really high quality, 196K. Sony pushed it for about a year or so, and I did about 5-6 albums in surround sound then. This would be like late 90s, I guess. And then the format flopped. Nobody wants 5.1 anymore. They all want MP3s on their iPod. People don't use speakers these days.
Yeah, that's true. That sort of covers what my next question was going to be. Was do you ever see a situation where music on its own will ever get adopted because I mean surround sound is still it's common in movies and that sort of thing. But as far as music, audio only as a listening format, do you think 5.1 will ever take off?
No. It's great. It'll always probably keep a minority market for audiophiles who can afford the equipment, and you can get some amazing things. We did an Orbital album, the Altogether, which they wrote in 5.1, and we did the whole thing in 5.1. It came out as a CD and a DVD at the same time, and it's an amazing album. If you've got the right system, you sit and listen to it. It really blows your mind the way things fly around, but it's just not practical to be mainstream. I think it'll always be a specialist thing. Apart from live concerts on DVD, that works. But even then, the music's at the front, the crowd are at the back. It immerses you in the whole experience, and it works in most home cinema setups because you're keeping the music at the front. I don't think enough people have the right equipment to make. I don't know. People who have 5.1 setups don't know where to put the speakers. They try and fit it into the living rooms. Nobody has the ideal living room where you've got a square room with the speakers equal distance from you. It's not practical to have it, is it?
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely, there's a lot of.
So I think that's blown 5.1 out of the water, really. And these days, it's all downloads.
Does it ever disappoint you that you put so much work into making something 5.1, something impressive like the orbital thing, and then that just gets summed down to a 2-channel stereo and nobody ever hears it? I mean, does that feel like a work lost kind of thing? Yeah,
kind of. It always sounds flat when you go back to stereo. After you've sat all day listening in 5.1 and suddenly you've got to do the stereo fold down and suddenly it all sounds a bit flat. But people who've never heard it don't know what they're missing, do they, I guess? If you've got the setup and you've got the equipment, it's fine. It doesn't really bother me.
I mean, I suppose that's true of a quality stereo system as well.
Yeah, exactly.
If you listen on iPhone,
it bothers me more when I hear people sitting on the bus listening to a song that I did coming out of the mobile phone. That bothers me more.
Yeah, that's terrible, isn't it? Okay, so I've got a few quick personal questions I was wondering about mixing in 5.1. If you take a stereo signal that you want to put of music that you want to put into 5.1, will you just put that through the left and the right, or will you sum down like a mono one for using the center channel, or would you just leave?
If it's just a stereo mix.
It's just
been mixed already,
and you want to try.
There's various emulators you can use to make it sound surround sound, but if all you've got is a stereo mix, that's all you're ever going to have, really. You can spread it out and make it come out of all the speakers, but it's still always going to be a stereo mix. Things aren't going to move from back to front and across the speakers over your head and all that kind of stuff, which is what is great about 5.1. The fact that you can move things around. So if you've just got a stereo mix, you can do a 5.1 emulation of it, which folds it down, puts it out of phase at the back, and it doesn't sound great to me. It's sort of kind of pointless.